Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of passenger. I was wrong. Tonight, let me tell you what happened on Flight 519. The first-class cabin of Meridian Air Flight 519 to Paris smelled like fresh coffee and warm bread, the particular calm of people who fly often enough to stop noticing the luxury around them. 15-year-old twins, Amara and Zora Reeves, sat in 2C and 2D, dressed the way their mother called comfortable, respectable. Joggers, soft hoodies, clean sneakers. Amara had her nose in a paperback, her braids falling over the headrest. Zora sketched the skyline outside the window in a battered notebook, already dreaming of the architecture school she wanted to attend. They'd flown first class a dozen times before, always on their father's account, always without incident. Their passports were already a small patchwork of stamps: school breaks in Lisbon, a summer in Tokyo, a spring trip to see their grandmother in Accra. Their father had built a life that made all of it possible, and he'd made sure his daughters understood exactly what it had cost him to build it. He never let them forget where they came from, even as he gave them a world most people never got to see. Tonight was different. A flight attendant named Deborah moved through the cabin with the practiced grace of someone who'd worked this route for 15 years. She poured champagne for the man in 1A, laughed at a joke from the couple in 2A, and then her eyes landed on the twins. She didn't smile. She studied them the way someone studies a puzzle piece that doesn't seem to fit. The hoodies, the sneakers, the sketchbook, all of it measured against some invisible standard she'd built for who belonged in this cabin and who didn't. "Good morning," she said, her voice suddenly clipped. "I'll need to see your boarding passes." Zora, without looking up from her sketch, reached into the document pocket of her bag and handed them over. Deborah took them with 2 fingers, like she didn't quite want to touch them, and studied the names printed there. Amara Reeves, Zora Reeves, Seat 2C, 2D. Her eyes moved from the paper to the girls' faces and back again, as though she expected the names to change if she looked long enough. "These are first-class seats," Deborah said finally. "Yes," Amara replied, closing her book. "That's why we're sitting in them." A man in the row behind let out a short laugh, not bothering to hide it. Deborah's tone sweetened into something worse than rudeness, condescension. "Sometimes passengers get a little confused about their seating. Economy is just a few rows back. I'd be happy to walk you there." Zora's spine straightened. "We're not confused. These are our assigned seats." Deborah's composure cracked further with every word the twins said back to her, as if their calm only confirmed something she'd already decided. She had 2 decades of experience reading passengers, or so she believed, and nothing about that experience had prepared her to be corrected by 2 teenagers in hoodies. "I'm going to need you to move," she said, loud enough now that heads were turning 2 rows over. "These seats are for our premium members." "And what exactly do you think we are?" Zora asked, her voice steady but sharp. Deborah leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial, while still being heard by half the cabin. "Look, I don't know how you 2 got these tickets. Maybe someone's miles got used without permission. Maybe there's a system error, but there's no way you're supposed to be sitting here. This cabin is full, and I'm sure whoever's actually meant to sit here will be along shortly." The accusation landed exactly where it was aimed. "You don't belong. You must have taken something that isn't yours." The other first-class passengers were openly watching now. A woman near the window whispered something to her husband, her hand cupped around her mouth like the twins couldn't see her doing it. Nobody said a word in the twins' defense. Nobody offered to help. Their silence was its own kind of agreement, the quiet complicity of people who'd rather look away than get involved. Amara felt the familiar sting behind her eyes, the heat of humiliation rising in her chest, but she pushed it down the way her father had taught her. "Control your breath. Control your dignity. That's all you owe anyone in this moment." She had used that same trick during oral exams, during nerve-wracking auditions, during every moment life had asked more of her composure than seemed fair. "I'd like to speak to the purser," Amara said. Deborah's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I am the purser on this flight. You'll deal with me. Are you moving on your own, or do I need to call someone?" It wasn't a question. It was a warning, delivered with the practiced calm of someone who'd never once had to face a consequence for saying it. Zora looked at her sister. 1,000 silent conversations passed between them in that single glance. Fear, anger, and the same unshakable resolve they'd shared since the crib. "We're not moving," she said, "because we haven't done anything wrong." Deborah's face went cold. She turned and marched toward the galley, reaching for the intercom phone, her shoulders rigid with fury, her footsteps landing hard against the cabin floor. The 5 minutes that followed felt endless. The cabin's easy calm had curdled into a tense, watchful silence. Passengers whispered behind raised hands. A man 2 rows back angled his phone toward the twins, pretending to check email. Then 2 airport security officers appeared at the cabin door, followed by Deborah, who now wore the expression of someone certain she'd been proven right. "Them," Deborah said, pointing. "Seats 2C and 2D, refusing to move, causing a disturbance." It was a lie built entirely out of her own actions. The twins hadn't caused anything. They'd simply refused to disappear quietly. The lead officer, a heavy-set man named Grady, stepped forward without an ounce of curiosity in his voice. "Ladies, we've had a report you're in the wrong seats and refusing crew instructions. Gather your things and come with us." "These are our seats," Amara said, her voice shaking now despite her effort to stay calm. "I can show you the confirmation. Our father booked them." "Everyone's got a story, kid," the second officer said. "Let's just get you off the plane so we can sort it out." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, informing passengers of a minor boarding issue, and a collective groan rolled through the cabin, a sound that made the twins, in an instant, the villains of this story instead of its victims. "We are not moving," Zora said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "You are making a mistake." Officer Grady's patience snapped. He reached for Amara's arm. The moment his hand closed around her, something shifted. The theoretical injustice became a physical one. Amara flinched, pulling back on instinct. "Don't touch my sister," Zora cried, moving to stand between them. The second officer blocked her immediately. They were pulled into the aisle, not fighting, not resisting, but handled with a force that had no business being used on 2 quiet teenagers. Zora's sketchbook hit the floor, pages scattering, including a half-finished drawing of the Eiffel Tower from their last family trip. Amara's book landed beside it. Nobody in the cabin moved to help. They were walked the length of first class, past dozens of passengers who found their own hands, their phones, their laps, suddenly fascinating. At the gate, a shaken agent named Priya looked between the officers and the twins with obvious confusion. "What happened?" "Refused to leave their seats," Grady muttered. "Purser said they don't belong up front." Amara's humiliation cooled into something clearer, anger with a direction. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When people won't listen to reason, you find a bigger microphone." She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and scrolled to a single contact. "Dad." He picked up on the first ring. "Amara, you should be in the air by now." "Dad," she said, her voice cracking, "they just dragged us off the plane." Dominic Reeves went very still in his downtown office. He'd built Virion Logistics from a 2-person startup into a company that moved freight for half the airlines in the country, including this one. He didn't raise his voice. He never did in moments that mattered most. "Where are you right now?" "Gate 14. There are security officers here." "Dad, they hurt my arm." He could hear Zora crying quietly in the background. Something in his chest went cold and absolutely still. "Put me on speaker," he said. "Hold the phone up so they can hear me." Amara did. Dominic's voice came through clear and level, carrying an authority that needed no volume to land. "My name is Dominic Reeves. I'm the father of the 2 girls you just physically removed from their seats. They are 15 years old. I purchased those tickets myself, on my corporate account. My company has a freight and logistics contract with this airline worth close to $40 million a year. I want the name of the flight attendant, and I want the names of every officer who put their hands on my daughters." Priya's face went pale as she pulled up the account. Every flag on the screen confirmed exactly what he'd said. "The purser's name is Deborah Wexler," Priya said quickly, deciding cooperation was her only option. "Thank you," Dominic said. "Now I need you to do something else. I'm going to connect you with your airline's CEO in a moment. Until then, I want you to tell the captain that Flight 519 will not be departing today." "Sir, I don't have that authority," Priya said. "You will in about 30 seconds. Within minutes, the gate intercom crackled to life with Priya's shaking voice, announcing the cancellation of Flight 519. Aboard the aircraft, the captain stared at his first officer in disbelief. In the first-class cabin, Deborah's satisfaction drained into cold dread the moment she saw the 2 empty seats she'd fought so hard to clear. By morning, an emergency call had reached Meridian Air's CEO, a woman named Carol Witt. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't need to. He laid out 3 requirements: a full public apology naming exactly what had happened, the termination of Deborah and the officers involved, and a mandatory bias training program for every employee, funded by the airline, designed by an outside firm of his choosing. The board resisted at first. Losing a $40 million contract was one thing. Losing Dominic Reeves as a public advocate, a man half the industry respected, was another. They agreed within a day. Deborah was fired along with both officers. Her 20-year career ended over the course of one flight. She never got the chance to explain herself the way she wanted to, because every explanation she offered kept circling back to the same ugly truth. She'd looked at two black teenagers in first class and decided, without checking a single fact, that they didn't belong. Months later, Amara and Zora stood at the opening of a community learning center funded by the settlement Dominic had insisted on, not as punishment, but as something built forward instead of backward. Rows of kids sat at new computers, working with tutors, sketching at long tables under bright windows. Zora watched a young girl drawing a house with a wide-open door and smoke curling from the chimney. Nothing closed off, nothing guarded. Something in her chest loosened. Her own sketchbook, which had grown dark and fortress-like since the flight, slowly began filling with open, light-filled buildings again. Libraries with glass walls, spaces built on trust instead of suspicion. Amara found her voice on her school's debate team. Her first topic, implicit bias in public spaces, her hands steady at the podium in a way they hadn't been steady in months. Meridian Air's culture didn't change overnight. But 6 months later, a young flight attendant trained under the new program noticed a hooded passenger boarding in first class and felt the old flicker of suspicion rise, then checked the manifest instead of her assumptions and welcomed him by name. He tweeted about the flight afterward, calling the airline the classiest way to travel. It wasn't a headline, it was just an ordinary flight, which was exactly the point. I've flown thousands of miles since that story crossed my path, and I still think about two girls who did nothing but sit quietly in seats that were rightfully theirs. Justice, when it's real, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to make sure the next flight doesn't repeat the last one. At 35,000 feet, everyone breathes the same recycled air. It's respect, not assumption, that decides who gets to breathe it without being questioned. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. There's another flight and another story waiting at altitude. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. Safe travels.